In 1801, they sailed across the Hudson River from New York City to Weehawken, New Jersey. Their goal was to commit an act many thought was wrong, and New York State held was illegal. Settling a dispute by a duel. And when they were finished, Hamilton was dead. But it's not the Hamilton that you're thinking of.
Hi there. Can you do me a favor? Can you go to the website of my podcast host provider, Libsyn, and fill out a brief survey? The reason for this is they are going to look for ways to support this show. I've done the show for 11 years, and I haven't done a survey of demographics of the listeners. The survey address is https://survey.libsyn.com/MHCBYUP. Now, that's very hard over the air, so on the description of this show, I'm going to have a link to that URL. So it will greatly help me in what I do if you could fill out that survey. You know, I've done the program for 11 years. We're starting to get a little more recognition than maybe in the past, which is great. And it looks like we're approaching the point where there will probably be some advertising on the program. Not sure when it's going to start. Two things I want to assure you of. It's not going to be overwhelming. It's not going to disrupt the purpose of the program to be entertaining and informing. Secondly, if you join the premium podcast, there will be episodes without ads there. So think about joining that. I'll let you know when anything gets started. But the first thing we need to do, let's get a survey, get the surveys filled out. It'll greatly assist me. The more support the show gets, the more time I can spend on it. And I really have some big plans. So thanks very much.
It starts when a New York lawyer, George Acker, gives a speech where he says to the former Secretary of the Treasury, now a lawyer in private practice out of the federal government, Alexander Hamilton, would not be opposed to overthrowing the new president, Thomas Jefferson. This is heard by his son, Philip Hamilton. Now, Philip Hamilton is born after the Revolution, first son of Alexander Hamilton. So he's just 29 when all of this goes on. He's seen his father rise to national prominence and then fall because of scandal. He and his friend Richard Price can't stand this type of criticism of Hamilton's father. So, that the old lines, that he's going to start an army, that he's going to take the country by force, that he's a new Napoleon, etc. So they confront Acker about this speech. Well, George Acker does not apologize. He actually extends the insult. He calls both Philip and his friend Richard Price a bunch of damned rascals. They respond in the way that convention had established, by challenging Acker to a duel. The weapons chosen were pistols. The dueling site chosen was the heights of Weehawken, New Jersey. It's illegal to duel in New Jersey just like it is in New York. But there they don't enforce it as much. And, you want to keep the dueling shot away from the city where everyone is. So the Weehawken grounds are where a lot of this thing happened. It should have been a very bad time for Acker because it's a double duel that he's got himself into now by insulting two people. So Richard Price takes the field first, November 22nd, 1801. Price and Acker exchange shots, but no one's injured. Okay, honor satisfied, everyone goes home. But Acker has a second duel. So the next day, it's Philip Hamilton's turn. He faces Acker now. They both fire their pistols. Hamilton's shot misses. Acker's shot now, hits Philip Hamilton, and, we know from accounts what it's like to be hit by one of these pistol balls. Lead bore is made small enough to fit in the pistol's muzzle, but large enough to blow through skin, shatter bones, cause infections. They don't know what infections are yet, but they do know that wounds can kill. It's horrible, and there's little that physicians can do unless it's an easy removal. This is not. Hamilton dies. He dies in agony, and it's a terrible thing for the family. Alexander Hamilton is filled with grief. He'll never quite be the same. Philip's sister, Angelica, suffers a nervous breakdown, never recovers. And yet, and I think this tells us everything we need to know about the hold of the practice of dueling on society at this time, none of this would stop Alexander Hamilton from then defending his honor against Vice President Aaron Burr on the same exact dueling grounds a couple of years later. He's shot by him. Political rival, person with grudges against Hamilton, felt he was insulted by Hamilton during his losing gubernatorial campaign. For the opinion of New York, well, the killing of Hamilton is murder. One thing that kind of helps this along, Hamilton does something that a lot of duelers actually did at this time. He writes a note to a friend that, I'm not actually going to aim for Burr, I'm going to aim at the sky. You know, that's actually very common. And that way, if your person hits you, if the blame is on them. Or maybe Hamilton was legitimate. Accounts differ as to what happened that day. Probably never figure it out. But because of that letter, and because of the person that was killed here, Alexander Hamilton, for the opinion of New York, particularly Federalist New York, the killing of Hamilton is murder. There's a public outcry. Burr has to hide, first in New Jersey, and then he runs down to South Carolina because he may well be prosecuted. Even though dueling wasn't prosecuted much during these times, there's a prosecutor in New York that wants to make a special case for the killer of Hamilton. Newspapers characterize the duel as dreadful, barbarous, vicious. At his funeral, the ships in New York fly their flags at half-mast. What can we make of this kind of activity today, dueling? It just doesn't fit with our society. It's always at contrast, too, with our opinion of early American history. I mean, we have such great figures that we respect, but then we also hear that they all took to the pistols from time to time to settle agreements. What happened to all the reason, all the argument, the Constitutional Convention, the debates of 1776, the Declaration? Weren't these reasonable men of the Enlightenment? Why the flintlocks? Today, I'm answering some questions from listeners, and I do this every once in a while. So if you're new to the program, it's a little bit off my normal way of taking a topic and tackling just one topic. But I do this. I'm very grateful for the people who listen to the program. And, you know, there's a Facebook site, Fans of My History Can Beat Up Your Politics, and you can get there first by going through www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com, following the link, or just go to Facebook and run a search for the program. Every once in a while, I'll take on questions from listeners there. Matt Beat writes on the My History Can Beat Up Your Politics Facebook page. Why and how did duels become less popular? I know it was public opinion, not legislation, that caused them to decline in popularity. But I'm still amazed that people like Aaron Burr and Andrew Jackson participated in them, yet still remained high in politics. Okay, Matt, thanks. A great question, and I'll get into why, but it's something that's starting to come up a little bit more in today's politics as well, the idea of dueling. First, just a quick note. It didn't exactly work out great for Burr. I mean, he did escape actual prosecution in the technical sense. In the political sense, his career was over. One-term vice president. Jefferson, although he was no fan of Hamilton, really didn't like Burr very much, to begin with. And then after this, it's just one more thing that makes it easier for the Jefferson administration to, in their second term, prosecute Burr. Dueling is one of these things. And there's a good side. And I'll relate that. And then there's a bad side as well. And I'll relate that as well. The good side is, think about all the things that dueling is not. It is not a street brawl. It is not a bar fight. It's not tarring and feathering. It's not mob violence. It's not a stabbing in the back. It's not conducted in the moment of anger. It's conducted later with the help of seconds under a set of gentlemen's rules that are all known The site is chosen, the weapons are chosen, the weapons are inspected by seconds, the people stand apart from each other, and they fire their shots. It's conducted between social equals, gentlemen. So in other words, if a great merchant of Philadelphia is walking down the street and is accosted by some laborer, and the laborer challenges him to a duel, he does not have to accept that and won't. Another thing to consider here is the pistols used most commonly. I mean, he could use other weapons, knives or swords, but 99% of the time we're talking about flintlock pistols. They have an accuracy level that allow for some misfires, opportunities to stop. And if the shots are fired, they very often miss. Dueling pistols were 6 to 16 inches long, usually sold in pairs. You would buy these powder cartridges for them, paper that contained a ball and powder. You'd put that into the muzzle. Then there is a flintcock that you put halfway back when you're ready to shoot that holds a piece of stone, a flint. That stone, when the trigger is pulled, is going to lift the pan cover, hit the pan, and hopefully ignite a spark that will then send the ball out of the barrel and towards your opponent. That's when everything works, but it's not an easy enterprise. Misfires are common. The first thing is that flint may make a spark, or it may not when it hits the pan. If a flint is dull, if you haven't taken care of it, the misfire rate goes way up. Moisture is a problem, moisture on the pan cover. If the pistols are damp, if they're not stored well, if it's just a very moist day, that could prevent the weapons from firing. But assuming all is well and your pistol can fire, accidental firing is also a problem for flintlocks. They could fire too soon. This happens all the time. And in many duels, if your weapon fired, that's considered a shot. Sometimes they'll let you do a do-over, depending on the rules agreed to. So, you had a lot of these interesting events that gave dueling an air of luck and providence and increased the chances. You know, most likely someone is hit, but more often than not, no one is killed in the encounter. So it is derivative dueling of a kind of God's justice, the type of fights that would happen in the Middle Ages, and whoever wins the fight, that's who God wanted to win the argument. No one really believes that anymore in the time we're talking about, 1801. It's not about providence. I mean, there might be some luck. A way for gentlemen to settle agreements. Perhaps a little bit of a release valve on some of the tensions that could happen between early Americans. A way that a dispute can be settled to everyone's satisfaction. A kind of law that exists where there isn't always law enforcement available. A practice that might reduce the amount of mob violence that might otherwise occur if someone feels really wronged. It's all those things. And that's the good spin. The bad spin is that it was something that was unseemly, despite all those gentlemanly trappings. There were some characters who would kind of use the duel and the threat of duel, especially if they were a very good marksman, to enlarge their social standing beyond what maybe it should have been. And you had these characters who were starting duels all the time. And that part of that bad side of dueling is that you had a declaration signer, Button Gwinnett. You had a Treasury Secretary, obviously Hamilton. You had Stephen Decatur, a naval hero of America, all falling to the duel. Who knows how many promising politicians were killed by this practice, and what kind of leadership the country could have benefited from. We shouldn't think that everyone supported dueling back then. Dueling was controversial from the founding of the nation. George Washington denounced the practice and applauded his officers when they refused challenges to duels, even though it was against the convention at the time to do so. Benjamin Franklin condemned dueling as a murderous practice. He made fun of it in stories. It's crazy. It's silly. Sam Houston and Henry Clay disagreed with it, though they both couldn't resist a duel to defend their honor. Some states in the nation passed anti-dueling ordinances. They were often disregarded, but 18 states had outlawed the practice by 1859, by the Civil War becoming more of a South and West function. So this is being fought out, and, Hamilton and Burr's duel is something that gives dueling a pretty bad name. But it doesn't stop a young and upcoming senator, Andrew Jackson from the state of Tennessee, from doing some dueling himself. There were jokes about Andrew Jackson that he rattled from all the pistol balls that were lodged inside him. One of his biographers, James Parton, claimed that Jackson kept pistols in perfect condition for 37 years to use. But the most famous of Jackson's affairs of honors happens 2 years after Burr and Hamilton get in a duel, and it's against Charles Dickinson. What did Dickinson do? Well, he insulted the future president by alleging that he cheated in a horse racing bet between Jackson and Dickinson's father-in-law. Then Dickinson did something else. He insults Jackson's wife. Oh no, all holy hickory hell is about to break loose. Slandering Jackson's wife was like sinning against the Holy Ghost. Jackson and Dickinson meet on the Red River in Kentucky. The trouble for Jackson is Dickinson is a well-known sharpshooter. He can hit his targets. So Jackson, and this was a tactic that could be employed in a duel, felt his only chance was to allow himself enough time to take a shot. Because one thing about dueling, you're both going to get a shot. But the only way you can allow yourself enough time is to let the person fire first. That's what he does. He allows Dickinson to fire first. Boom! Hits Jackson in the ribs. He doesn't fall. He doesn't stop. It hurts him. And he's going to have that wound for the rest of his life. As president, he's still going to cough. But then Jackson takes aim, fires, only goes halfway. Flint doesn't hit the pan. Now, by common dueling rules, he should have stopped there. He doesn't. He fires again and kills Dickinson. For the rest of Jackson's life, that story's going to haunt him. He's going to be accused of murder in various pamphlets as he's running for president, and he'll have health problems stemming from that wound for the rest of his life. Andrew Jackson wasn't president at the time that he dueled. A Secretary of State, Henry Clay, was. Now, Henry Clay gets into a duel with John Randolph, and the reason for it is that Randolph had quite a mouth. He calls the President of the United States a traitor, calls Senator Daniel Webster a vile slanderer. When he accused Secretary of State Henry Clay of crucifying the Constitution and cheating at cards, I think we know which one was a greater insult. He ended up the recipient of an invitation to duel. Unfortunately, this is an example of one of the duels that works out better. There are two sets of misfires. Clay's coat is damaged by one of the pistol balls, but that's it. The two walk over, shake hands, everybody's honor is saved, and Randolph buys Clay a new coat. Clay simply replies, "I'm glad the debt is no greater." Dueling continues pretty far into American history, especially when you go west. You still have Senator Broderick, David Broderick of California, killed in a duel in 1859. A loss to the nation, a loss to the state. This was a fireman from New York who moved to California, started to establish the politics of the city of San Francisco, became a prominent free state politician. He was one of the Northern Democrats, and the reason he got into a duel was his competition with the pro-slavery California Democrats. We've heard of the story of Preston Brooks, the South Carolina congressman who attacks Charles Sumner right before the Civil War with a cane. Sumner had insulted Brooks's uncle, and he was getting revenge on him. There's another part of that story, though, and that is that a Northern congressman then challenges Brooks to a duel in order to avenge Sumner. And Brooks, knowing that this particular congressman was a very good shot, doesn't take the duel. This is used as a propaganda point against the South, against Brooks, for some time. That he was too wimpy to do the duel. So dueling still has this purpose. In other words, it's the civilized way of settling agreements, but still macho. You know, what Brooks had done is attack a man in the Senate floor with a cane when he couldn't get out of the chair. This is the organized, civilized way to settle disputes. So you still have that going on. In answer to your question, why did dueling become more in disfavor? Well, to some degree, it was just public opinion. And it was starting at that time. I gave you Washington and Franklin's quotes about it. So I think there were a good number of people who were against the practice, even though they knew it went on. And that evolved. I also think, while not directly the result of just simply the legislation passed against duels, I think that the strong arm of the law becomes that much stronger as you move through American history. An infant nation with a little, thin legal system becomes a nation with a lot of courts and legal administration and law enforcement. So you need a dueling code to settle disputes a little less. A third factor, I think, would be the technology of the time. So what you're going to see prior to the Civil War is much better cartridges, much better precision weapons. So pistols aren't going to misfire as much, allowing all those opportunities for Providence to stop the duel. No. If you're not a good shot, you're going to get killed in a duel. So I think it just becomes less and less important over time. Now, there's a little bit of talk about dueling these days, a little bit, because you do hear people saying, it was representative of a system of honor that I wish we had today. This was the way that people settled their differences. People had honor, they had shame. Look at our politics today. People are just lying about each other, just saying whatever they want, insulting as much as they want. What if we had something like this, some way of preserving that old system of honor? I get it. And I do understand, and I'm happy to go back into history and look at things in their own context at the time, and not just condemn a practice, because the modern viewpoint would be to condemn it and try to understand. And I'm also happy to look at the bad sides of it, even at that time. But I don't want to over-romanticize or bring something into the present that may not apply. I think there's two things to think about with dueling. One is that, although there's an argument that it brought more honor to American life, and I guess in some ways it did, if it might have reduced mob violence, it might have been a reduction of some tension between people, a reduction in angry fights between people. All you have to do is look at the early American political newspapers, and you'll see that it had no impact on reducing the amount of libel or slander or lies told about people or insults. And sometimes these were done anonymously. But to me, that seems a limiter on free speech because people were afraid of a duel. But they still did the insulting, and there was still just as much partisan politics in those days. But secondly, I think the thing to remember about dueling is the good guys didn't always win. And so you had this weird situation where a person could get away with insulting a person, and the victim would also be killed. So it was a horrible system in a way. We're always assuming that the good person would win the duel and seek their honor. But what could very often happen is a host of bad characters would win these duels and then thrive. Ben Franklin was right on this one. It's a silly system.
Hey, just a reminder again to please fill out that survey for me. There will be a link to the URL in the show notes, the description. Really helps a lot.